Courtney.
Hi, and hello, everyone. I am Courtney Sullivan, and I'm very excited to be here tonight in conversation with one of my favorite humans and favorite authors, Ann Napolitano, who is the author of four fabulous novels. Most recently, Hello Beautiful, which was Oprah Winfrey's 100th book club pick and has sold a mere million plus copies in the short time it's been on sale. And Anne's first novel that we're here to celebrate and talk about tonight, Within Arm's Reach, was published 20 years ago. Exactly. So it's a very fitting kind of full circle moment, and I'm really excited to be here to talk to her about it. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Courtney. I'm excited to be here too and excited to talk to one of my favorite humans and authors. And so I'm going to introduce Courtney Sullivan. First of all, she has a wonderful and amazing new novel coming out in July called The Cliffs. Do you have it there to show the cover?
You.
Hold it up. Yeah, you guys should pre-order it now. It is so good. It is her best book, and that is really saying something. So
Thank
that
you.
comes out in July. It's very exciting. She has also written five other novels. Um, she's 10 years younger than me, and she's written published several more books than I have. Commencement, Maine, The Engagements, Saints for All of Occasions, and Friends and Strangers. And the other very exciting thing on her bio is that she's done a lot of other stuff. She's been published in every publication that you can think of, etc. Her work has been published internationally in many languages. But in 2017, she wrote the foreword to the new editions of two of her and my and everybody's favorite classic novels, Anne of Green Gables and Little Women, which is wild. What an amazing thing. I feel like that's like when you quit.
I know. It's crazy, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah. Well, Anne,
Yes.
congratulations on this fantastic re-release of your beautiful novel. Um, as you know, because we've discussed it, Anne and I are very dear friends, and I was sort of afraid to read it. This is the one book of yours that I hadn't read, and I feel like I'm afraid to have anyone read my first novel because I wrote it so long ago and I don't know what's in there. And then I read this novel, and not only did I absolutely love it and see it as just another of one of my favorite Ann Napolitano books, but I also was fascinated. I shouldn't have been surprised, but still I was, and fascinated by the fact that there are all these through lines that kind of come forth in this novel that have come through all of your books, but especially Hello Beautiful, I would say. And I wondered, you do this great letter at the end of the book, and I think the way you described it was that all of your books share DNA, which I love. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that shared DNA and how you see that coming out.
Sure. I guess I should also, you were scared to read it. I was scared to read it because I wrote it in my late 20s and I'm 52 now. And it went out of print like, I don't know, 12 years ago or something. It's been really inaccessible. And which was, you know, understandable to me and that made sense. But then people lovely readers who read Hello Beautiful and Dear Edward wrote to me and to my publisher saying they would love to read my first novel, but it's impossible to find. It's only like $78 on Amazon. Was there another way to get it? And so my publisher decided to reissue it, which is really obviously so delightful and, like you said, really very full circle for me. But that meant I had to read it, and which was terrifying. Your first novel is wonderful and was like a big hit. My first novel really disappeared, so I'm like, oh God, what is it going to be like? And it was really interesting. It is really, there's the idea that all of our cells are replaced every 7 years. So
Mhm.
like, Hello Beautiful is still like, it's part of my heart. It's part of my current heart and cells and thoughts and worries, etc. Whereas I can feel that Within Arm's Reach is from like an earlier iteration of me. So um, I recognize the book and I didn't dislike it, which is good. I did like it. But I also really made me feel for the young woman who wrote it,
Mm.
um, because I had written two novels before it in my 20s, and neither of those had been published. So when I was writing Within Arm's Reach, I really believed that it was not going to be published.
Mm.
Um, and I wrote it out of a realization that writing was truly what I loved to do, and that I needed to do it in order to feel whole in like myself.
Yeah.
And so I wrote that book in in a sense really completely for me, and absolutely did not think anyone was going to read it. And as a result, I wrote about my mother's Irish Catholic family in a way that I probably wouldn't have if I thought anyone would ever read it.
Yeah.
Not that I said anything negative about them, but there are stories from my mother's family that are in it, and it is a family drama in the same way that Hello Beautiful ultimately is a family drama, and there is intergenerational trauma in both of them. Um, there are sisters. There's various aspects in which the two books are obviously related to each other.
Yeah. It's interesting because I didn't know you when you wrote this book. And
Oh.
so, I think with my first novel too, I remember one time trying to listen to the audio and I got to like the third paragraph and immediately ejected the CD. It was a CD and being like, "Oh my god, no." That's because it was very racy. And it's interesting because I think as writers, we do tend to get better as we get older, and that's nice. We don't peak at 14 like gymnasts or something, we can actually improve with age, but I do think that, there's something very freeing about the first novel when you've yet to ever have feedback, you've yet to be received. It's kind of like I feel like it's like when you have your child before they've gone off to school and you're like, "This is the best baby who ever lived," and then you see them with all the other babies and you're like, "Oh, okay." But I feel like I don't know, I wonder if there's anything that you think, uh, you wrote then that you kind of just said this, that you wouldn't necessarily write about your family in the same way. Are there other things that you see in this book that you think, "I'm glad I put that down when I did because I wouldn't write that now?"
Well, I really actually I am a total believer in that the book that you write now is it's what lights you up and enervates everything inside of you at this moment. Like actually, so there were two books that weren't published before Within Arm's Reach. And the first one I think was just terrible. I really do feel like I had to write a novel in order to figure out how to write a novel. I like that quote a lot about how writing a short story is like swimming across a lake. And if you know how to swim, you can see the other side of the lake. You can swim across a lake, but like writing a novel is like swimming across the ocean, and that is like a whole different thing. And you've got to do research and like plan and try and experiment, etc. So I feel like the first novel was terrible, but it helped me figure out how to pace this sort of behemoth thing that you try to write. And then the second book I actually liked, and it almost sold. So after Within Arm's Reach was published, I went back to it and read it again, thinking maybe I can like make a few changes, like spend 6 months working on it and then send it out again. And then I wouldn't have to write a whole new novel.
Yeah.
But when I read it, I still thought, oh, it's not bad, but it wasn't of me anymore. Like I couldn't invest myself into the story anymore in order to like make it better. So I do think like when teaching or whatever, it's like put everything in this novel. Don't save something. Like don't save a story, don't save like something you're worried about, don't save like a metaphor, like because this is what they're for now. So I'm glad, that I wrote the book that I wrote then. It's set in my hometown. Like there's a lot of sort of ways in which it was sort of um, has roots in myself and my own life. And I think I needed that because it was my first novel. It's like I needed a banister to walk up those stairs, and writing kind of about my grandmother and writing about the town that I grew up in was like the banister.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Um, Couple of things. I just remembered that I forgot to tell the
Oh,
wonderful participants two important pieces of information. I had one job at the beginning and I failed. Some of you have ordered signed copies of Within Arm's Reach from Barnes and Noble, and I just wanted to let you know that you will be receiving them within 8 to 10 days. Is that right? Yes.
In the mail, yeah. Yeah. Yes.
In the mail, hand delivered by Ann. She put it on I'm pretty sure. And also, we really want your questions. So we are going to move on to your questions in a few minutes. And please ask them. If you didn't already ask them on the Eventbrite, please ask them in the Q&A section, and we will read them from there. Don't put them in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A. But if you already asked via Eventbrite, we have those questions. So don't worry about asking them again. So going back, Ann, to what you just said, I also wrote 2 novels that live in a drawer and will never be published before my first published novel. And I wonder what it is, because I'm sure there are many writers out there watching this. And I wonder, what is it that keeps us, or kept you, trying? Or had you reached a point where it wasn't about publishing, or was it still about publishing, or what was it for you?
Yeah, no, for me, it was, how old were you when your first novel was published?
28.
Oh my God. So you wrote 2 novels before that that are in a drawer?
Yeah,
I think
but
I forgot that.
how old were you when Within Arm's Reach was published? You were really
Well, I was actually, you're right. I mean, it took a while to publish. It didn't sell right away, in keeping with the rest of my up until then publishing journey. Well, so I think for me, I can't write short stories. When I tried to write short stories during college, they just got longer and longer. And eventually my professor was like, I think you're a novelist. So I hadn't published anything like ever.
Yeah.
And when the second novel failed to be published, and I was like 27 and I was working as a personal assistant, I I totally just got depressed because this was all I wanted to do, and everyone in my life knew that it's what I wanted. And so I really felt like I had failed with this sort of capital F. And my dad was sending me brochures for law school in the mail, and he signed me up to take an all-day long career test, which the result of which was that I should be a park ranger, and which wasn't what my father wanted. Obviously, he was hoping it would say like stockbroker or lawyer, and I lived in New York City. It wasn't particularly outdoorsy, so it's saying that I should be a park ranger was also very confusing to me, and I didn't know what
Well,
else to
you
do.
are very outdoorsy and you love
Now,
nature. So it was
now
onto something.
Yeah, I know. I think I'd be a pretty good park ranger.
Great.
But at the time, I was not as outdoorsy kind of as I am now. Um, and I didn't know what to like. I just didn't know what to do. And one day I was sitting at my kitchen table and I started writing a story, even though I had decided I wasn't going to write anymore. And while I was writing it, I felt better. And like the foggy sadness I'd been in lifted. And I did it again the next day, but like really just so I could feel better. And that was actually, and I discovered by stringing together several days that the foggy sadness lifted. And I realized that I had to write, and that it was no longer about the destination. Like I had always been writing towards the destination, which most writers understandably do, which is publication. And also like proving to my parents and the other people in my life that I really was meant to do this and I wasn't crazy to like have this dream.
Yeah.
But like I failed to reach that destination, and by failing, I realized that I loved writing so much, and it was so necessary to me feeling like myself, that I was going to keep writing forever, even if I never published. And I assumed I would never publish. And that was like a huge weight lifted off. And I think ever since then, I mean, I went on to be, not, I mean, I published, but there was another decade. I sold Dear Edward when I was 46. And
Yeah.
that's when I became quote unquote successful. So I had like a very long stretch of, if I got to sit down and write, then I was happy, and it wasn't about the publication at all. And that has stayed. It's now like I am, quote unquote successful, but I can't feel it because like I built everything from the inside so long ago that for me, the fact that I get to write another book is the greatest thing ever. And if someone says something nice to me about my books, which they do, I'm so delighted and grateful. Like, we're so lucky.
Yeah. Oh, we are. Yeah. I think what kind of astonished me when I read Within Arm's Reach is that it is so good that it reminded me of just how very random and subjective this business is, because to my mind, there's no reason why that book shouldn't have been a huge hit, as much as your last two books have been. Do you think that that sort of path has been helpful to you as a writer in some ways, like to have the success later on? Or
Yeah.
does it not? Okay, tell us about that.
Well, no, I'm grateful, but I mean, it's the only way I've known it. And I mean, you have the opposite thing where you were successful right away. Um, I feel like the risk in that is that I remember when I sold Dear Edward, I said to my friend Patrick that it was very exciting. There was like a bidding thing going on. And, I said that if this had happened to me when I was 27, I would have thought I was really hot shit.
Yeah.
And at 46, I was like, oh no, this is like amazing, but I'm so lucky. And there's so many reasons. And like you said, it is so random and the business is so subjective. And there are beautiful, amazing books that come out every year that don't get the attention that they should,
Yeah.
because there are so many books, or some vagary of like, you know, a publicist goes on vacation, or, like things like that. So it's also random. Um, so I feel very grateful that that it took me so long, and that by the time it happened I was like, oh, I see that there's like 27 different factors in this, and I also already knew who I was and everything like that.
Yes, I think unless you're one of maybe 5 people in the world, you're not going to have, like, just straight, hit after hit after hit after hit, and so you will at some point figure this out, whether it's right
Yeah.
or whether you have to feel like hot shit and then realize, "Oh, no, I'm not." Like,
Yeah.
that every book is its own journey, and every book nothing necessarily guarantees the next thing. So you
Yeah.
really do, at the end of the day, I think all of us who do this, um, on the one hand, I do think the publishing piece is really important to people. It's certainly important to me. On the other
Yeah.
hand, and I don't want to like lie about that, but on the other hand, all the working writers I know, it really does just come back to loving the actual work of writing.
It
I think,
has to.
yeah.
I mean, because the publication also is so short, and you have no control over how that goes. Like any
Yeah.
number of things can happen once you hand your book over, and what if you're not in control of that, and you are not, then and if you have all of your hopes and dreams resting on that very precarious period, it can be heartbreaking. And even if you don't have all your hopes and dreams based on it, you still spent years working on that book. And if the book comes out and disappears, it is very, very sad. There's no getting away from that. But um, all you can do and hope for is that you'll love the practice of writing the next one.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, let's talk about the characters in the novel a little bit. Can I do
Sure.
that?
Yes.
I um well, I love all of them. I love the sisters so much. And Catherine, the grandmother, is so fascinating to me. I read something that you wrote about how Catherine is very much based the exterior, the shell of her and her life experiences on your own grandmother's story. And you said that your own grandmother shared nothing of her interior life. And so you said, I wondered if I could invent the truth because in my family, the real truth was not readily available. And I think a lot of us can relate to that. And a lot of times, I try to explain to people sometimes when they ask what I write about, I'm not necessarily writing like a mystery or a murder or something really dramatic, because what fascinates me endlessly, and I think you too, is like what we cannot see is the internal life of other human beings. That's the one thing we just can never quite know, and yet to me it's the most fascinating thing. And so how
Even
do you
like your husband, or you don't know what his interior life is.
yes, so how do you um how do you go about creating that? And did it ultimately make you feel a sense of being closer to people in your life, in your family? Because writing is this exercise in kind of radical empathy, even if what you've created is not really what their inner life is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I mean, I do think that I love going into different heads. I know you do too, into different points of view. And I do think one of the things that I love about writing is that while I'm writing a novel, like over and over, it reinforces for me that like I love everyone kind of because I can go into the heads of someone who's so different from me and who behaves in ways that like are anathema to me. But by going into their point of view, I fully understand why they're doing it. It makes complete sense and they're doing it for what they consider to be the right reasons and like I love them as characters. And I feel like that is radical empathy building. And I don't know for writing about my family, I think it was my way of like pouring love into all the silence and all the sort of like secrets that were kept and people who stay, you know, in the same room at a family party but don't speak because they just don't know how to. Um, and it was my way of being, like standing in that room with them and being like you all love each other and I'm going to go into your heads fictionally and show that. So I think it makes me feel better. I don't think it actually does anything, of course, in actuality.
Well, there is so much love in this family, and I especially love the relationship between the grandmother and her granddaughters because I think there's certain expectations within a mother-daughter relationship that if you're lucky might not play out in the grandmother-granddaughter relationship. She seems more able to let them be who they are maybe, um, than their own mother might be, or she might be with her own daughter.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also her age. Like, I think probably 10 years earlier, she would have been more meddling and
Yeah.
more judgmental. It's like, it's Catherine, who's the name of the grandmother. It's like she feels the strings within her loosening, holding her to this earth. And with everything in her loosening, she is seeing people who are dead in dreams and visions. And she's also not controlling her children or her grandchildren in the way that I think she used to, um, which is you know lovely for the grandchildren. And also, I think the grandmother realizes while she does that she probably should have done that earlier.
Yeah. I love the kind of thread of female rage in this family that you because I think that's something that maybe gets a little bit more attention now. I don't think it did 20 years ago per se. So I feel like there's a lot in this
Yeah.
book really ahead of its time, and that's one of the things. Um, I don't know. I just love that. Tell us about that and how you see that kind of moving through the generations.
I hadn't thought of that. I mean, that's just like one of the things about like it being a book that I wrote so long ago that I'm like, oh, is that true? Like, I don't like it's not connected to my, you know,
Well,
it's not
you're
stitched.
not a ragey person, so
No,
it's not.
I'm not a rage. No, but I've known ragey people. And I've been in, relationship with ragey people, and I don't like it. Um, and but I think and when you have someone who's raging, it changes the personality and demeanor of all the people around that person because they become attentive to it, and someone becomes like a weather forecaster, and is like, what is the mood, what is the timbre of this room, and someone else is more inspired to rage in response to be like, oh no, I'm going to one up you. I mean, I think it is very common and exists in a lot of families. Um, and the two sisters, the two granddaughters who are in their late 20s, Gracie and Lila, kind of take the two opposite paths. Like Lila is much more prone to hardness in response to any sort of pushback, whereas Gracie is much more soft and fearful. And her deciding to keep her baby is really the first time that she's put her foot down and been like, this is the life that I'm going to lead,
Mhm.
whether you guys like it or not, even though she really doesn't know what she's going to do.
Yeah.
Um, so the dynamics, I think in every family, like there just are these sort of like forces that push and shape everyone, and some of them end up being, louder forces than other ones. They're fun
I
to track.
I think what I liked about the rage piece was that Lila owns it. She says, I have this rage, and so does my mother, and so did my grandfather. And she really kind of like nails it that these things, there are a lot of things that we hand down through generations, diseases and things like that, but we also can hand down emotions and
Yeah,
personalities.
yeah.
Um, a couple more quick questions and then we'll move to the audience questions. I love the role that sort of ghosts and visions of people from the past play in this novel. And I wonder if you can tell us how that came to be and why you included that. And
Mhm.
that's another thing that exists in some generation, in some people in each generation of the family.
Yeah. Well, that was actually one of my favorite things in rereading the book. I was like, oh, I like I like that that exists in this book. And well, so this book is about an Irish Catholic family who obviously lives in America. You have written a lot about Irish Catholic people who live in America. You are Irish Catholic. I am 50. My mother is Irish Catholic she's a McNamara. And my grandfather used to tell us stories about leprechauns and sing us all the Irish songs, and they would talk about he would occasionally talk about dead people as if they were still alive. And so I mean, I experienced it as like a cultural phenomenon, basically,
Yeah.
where there was this sort of magic that was allowed, that was believed in, and particularly if you were drinking. But it was a lightness and a fun to it. Like it was like a why would we put this wall between the living and the dead if we can just make the wall, see through and see your Aunt Nancy, like who's passed away. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
no, I like it too. I'm like, I feel like I do think people, see ghosts and see and talk to people that they've lost. Many widows still, walk around the house talking to their dead husband. And I don't think that's not real.
Mhm.
So I think it's just another like facet of being human that a lot of us don't turn to or don't even consider. And some of us do, some people believe in ghosts, some people don't.
Mhm.
um, our friend Helen, who I think is on tonight, very much believes in ghosts and has like myriad stories in her family of things that the ghosts did, like as if the same thing that like her grandfather did, like just as real and just as legitimate. And I've always loved that. Like I think that's delightful. We're here for such a short time. Like make some people up, you
Yes.
know, or keep talking to the people you love, even if they're 3,000 miles away and aren't talking to you anymore.
Right, right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's like I think many of us, especially in this sort of COVID times and post-COVID times, like you might have someone who's you consider one of your very best friends and you talk to them 4 times a year or 2 times a year, but it's like so they really only exist in your mind too in a weird way, right? But they're so
Yeah.
constant there. And does
Yes.
that mean anything less than someone you like less but see every day at, school pickup or something? No, it doesn't.
I love that. That's true. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's totally true. Like it's like you're in conversation with these people that you love, and then when you actually talk to them 6 months later, you just pick right up because like
Yeah.
you've been communicating within
Yeah.
yourselves the whole time. Yeah, that's nice.
Okay, to wrap it up, I'm just going to ask you this. So, reading this book over 20 years after you wrote it, um, and I know you're very evolved as a human, and so I think you were able to do that and say, I'm reading this as something that was written by someone else in a way, because we are so different, obviously, 20 years later. But was there anything that you thought, oh, I really wish I had done that differently? You might not be able to tell us because we don't want spoilers, of course, but
Uh, um, well, you said something to me when I talked to you earlier this week, where there's something that happens to some birds in this book that I think I could have done differently. I mean, I do. There are things that I think I could have done differently. It's actually for me. It's more like I really love ending chapters. Like that's like a this is the current me. Like there's to me there's these like it's like music. It's like I just hear the rhythm of every, a chapter basically like going all these different places. And I know it's almost like the end of a book, the end of a chapter where like it all comes together in some kind of moment, small or big. And I'm like, oh, so satisfying. And I don't, some of the chapters in Within Arm's Reach do that, but I don't know that they all do, which of course makes sense because it was my first novel. But like it's more things like that that I notice as opposed to like plot that I would have changed.
Yeah. Um, yes, I know our friend Helen, who is watching, will agree about the birds, and the rest of you let
Yeah,
us.
she doesn't remember. I'm sure she doesn't remember. Actually, what I said to you, I can't believe that Helen let me do it because Helen can't bear it when anything bad happens to animals.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Um, I'm going to move on to some of the audience questions, Anne.
sure.
This is a good one. What writers and creatives, I love the two parts, have, thank you. My son just told me I'm doing great.
Oh, thank you, Leah.
Thanks, Leo. Uh, what writers and creatives have influenced you as an author?
Oh, um, so many. Um, like you, I listen to audiobooks like all the time. I'm like basically 70% fiction between writing a book and then I'm always listening to a book as well. So like I just need like a constant influx of wonderful books, essentially. I mean, when I was younger, I mean, not super younger, but like the Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing was like a very impactful book for me that I read when I was in high school. The stories of Raymond Carver, Henry James was like an obsession for me. Um, and and then now, I mean, Ann Patchett, Lauren Groff, Emily St. John Mandel. Um, I the books like recently, like James by Percival Everett is like spectacular. Um, Trust by Hernan Diaz. I really love Northwoods by Daniel Mason. The last two books by Maggie O'Farrell. Like there's so many writers that I love and whose work just blow me away, and I'm so grateful for. And I read all the time,
Yeah,
like you do.
I think so. What came to mind for me with that, and I hope it's okay for me to mention this, is how affected we were by Hamilton, because the
Oh,
question was about writers, but creatives as well. And I think it's really
oh,
because so many writers I know, um, and you and I are at the top of the list, were so moved by Hamilton when it came out. And so it sort of changed, I think, the way we thought about storytelling in a way.
mm,
Um, and I think about Hamilton a lot still because I feel like it came out at such a particular moment. And I don't know if it could come out now in the same way. We live in a completely different world, and it's only been, not that many years, not even a
yeah,
decade.
yeah. My
Um,
son was in first grade. Who's now in? Oh well, he's now in ninth grade. So yeah, 8 years ago, I guess.
I think it's really amazing, to consider how things influence us. I think for me, music is a huge influence, not necessarily always books. I mean, books too, of course, but especially for getting into the headspace of writing something in particular, I find music to be a much faster way in as a form
Oh,
of
see, I could like can't listen to. I'm like embarrassed by how not musical I am, but I honestly feel like all the narrative, my own and others, are like music in my head.
yeah.
Like they're like I feel like the language is music, and whatever the pulse of whatever I'm writing is music. And when actual music comes on, I'm kind of like, oh, this is too much. Um,
I can't listen to music while I'm writing, but like for example, in my most recent book, I had these, 20 somethings who were falling in love in this super passionate way. And I was like, I just can't really access it. Like I am like a married mom of two young children. I don't know. I can't really access it like that. So then I just like went and listened to Taylor Swift for 2 hours. And then I was like,
oh,
oh, I'm in. You know what I
oh,
mean?
that's yeah, that's so interesting. That
It's
makes
kind
so much sense.
of I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, this person is How did you become friends and how have you helped each other with your writing? Oh my gosh. You've helped me so much more than I've helped you.
We met when Courtney had Maine coming out, I think, which was, yeah. And I had my second novel, A Good Hard Look, coming out, and our agents are part of the same agency. And they threw a party during like a book expo week in New York for like several of their authors that had books coming out. So I met Courtney at that. And then I don't know, we just became very good friends.
Did you remember that I had I feel like this was just the perfect introduction to me for you, was that I had I bought a new dress at Anthropologie, but then I realized it had the giant plastic security thing like stuck to the
I,
front of it.
and
So
you had to go back home, right?
I went and got it removed from the dress and then was late to the party. But yeah, at some
So
point
you.
it is so me. At some point we started having monthly lunches in Brooklyn and we both lived in Brooklyn and now I live in Massachusetts, so we do monthly phone calls. And our
They're like 5 hours long.
yeah, our families are always like, "Okay, I'll see you tonight."
Yeah, my boys get like mad when I'm going to talk to Courtney because I'm going to be out of touch for so long.
And Anne is in this incredible writing group and has been for a long time with Helen Ellis and Hannah Tinty, two wonderful authors who who I am also lucky to know. And Anne and Helen read one of my novels for me, Saints for All Occasions, and gave me feedback and then I sort of like now feel like I can't live without your feedback, Anne. So unfortunately, Anne
So
has to read all of my books before they come out.
I'm very lucky. And also Courtney and I help each other, like we give each other advice for like publishing stuff and all that kind of stuff. Like I'll absolutely run something by her to see what she thinks if I don't know what to think. And she knows more about the business in many ways than I do because I'm like clueless in various ways. Um, so yeah, it's lovely.
Um, so I like this question because Anne and I both love audiobooks. And the question is, do authors realize hearing a book is different than reading a book? This is from the reader and listener's point of view. I myself am like, because I love audiobooks so much now and I've just kind of discovered them in the last few years. Um, Now I have like particular readers I love, and if I see that that's the person reading it, I'm all in. And I feel like the reader can really make or break the book. And so I think this question is very accurate that yes, it is a really different experience, but I've come around to thinking that listening to a book is reading. It's
A
okay.
100%. Yes, 100%. I agree. I mean, I'm the same as you. I listen to most of the books because I can do it. Well, I can go exercise. I can do the dishes, etc., and be listening to books the whole time. And I love it. Like it's made my life so much like richer.
Yeah, me too. And the audio version of Within Arm's Reach is spectacular. It's really
Mm,
wonderful. I
yeah,
loved it.
and I got to read in a booth for the first time in my life, like because I read the author's note for it, and I've never read anything, so to speak, professionally before. So that was a fun experience.
This is interesting. So, okay, someone asks, you are an inspiration to aspiring writers. Please share with us your writing practice and how it has evolved over the years. Post-it notes, outlines, beta readers.
Oh, okay. Um, Thank you. Um, it has evolved over the years. So for Within Arm's Reach, I was what's called an intuitive writer, or it's often called pantsing. Is that what you say?
What?
You don't know that? Like going by the seat, flying by the seat of your pants. It's called a pantser. They
Yeah,
do call
pantsing
that.
is something very different, and that.
Oh, really? See? All right. So I was an intuitive writer. Um, there is a great quote from E.L. Doctorow where he says that writing a novel is like driving home on a foggy night. You can only see as far as the end of the headlights beam, but that's enough to get you home. You see a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and there's your driveway. And it's great because it's an act of discovery. It's like you're in a scene and someone walks in and says something you didn't know they were going to say, and something happens that you didn't know was going to happen. and it's like being a reader, and it's a really fun way to write. And that is how I wrote Within Arm's Reach. I didn't plot at all. And for the next book that I wrote, A Good Hard Look, that's where it proved to be a problem for me, because I drove in like figure eights all over the country before I found the driveway. It took me 8 years. I wrote and threw away like 400 pages. I was following tangents. And when I finished that book finally, my husband was like, I think you should do the next one differently somehow, because like this is supposed to be a labor of love and you were in despair for a lot of it.
Mhm.
And so that's when I changed my process. And my process now is that from when I get an idea, like the first idea for a new book, it could be as small, like for Hello Beautiful, it was a sad boy dribbling a basketball. I set like a invisible timer inside myself, a 9 month timer. And for the next 9 months, I am not allowed to write what I call pretty sentences. I can't write scenes. All I'm allowed to do is think, research, and take notes. And I try to figure out the book with my analytical brain, which does not work while I'm writing during that period. And I just come up with every possible idea. I try to figure out who every character in the book is. I try to figure out which things I think are going to happen. And when that timer goes off, I start writing it. So that's the way now that I sort of, and probably only like 30% of what I think of ends up in the book, but it lets me start in a much more solid way. And then I figure out new things, by being surprised within what I've already sort of determined.
I think that's so fascinating, and I think it's really unique. I think you're the only writer I know who does that, who, thinks it out in this particular way. I
Well, there are
love.
like Ann Patchett apparently thinks the whole, like, gets the whole novel in her head, like every scene, what people say to each other, like all lives in her head until she writes it down. And like John Irving, like
But
plots
it's
the
so
entire thing.
right? And you don't do an outline, do you? It's more of
No,
a
because I can't. I don't know how to do that. Like my
yeah.
brain won't do. I can't, if it was like, oh, you have to plot the whole thing out, I'd be like, oh well, I guess I can't write a novel because yeah.
And a lot of people want to know about your daily sort of practice. Like, do you write a certain time each day? What do you do? What's your sort of ritual, I guess, once you're actually writing?
I want to hear about your daily routine and ritual too.
Have none.
Well, the thing is, I mean, my children are much older than Courtney's. They're almost 15 and 17, and but really, since they were born, I haven't had what I would call like any kind of an ironclad schedule. Like I think when you have kids, um, I just learned to write around them and around, in the pockets of time that I could write.
Yeah.
And that, even though they no longer depend on me in the same way, that sort of has continued. So what I would say now is that basically I write 7 days a week, which sounds onerous and bad, but I really write 7 days a week because I want to. And some of those days I might only write for like a half hour. And
Yeah.
other days I may do like two sessions that are 3 hours each. So it really depends. But like I do it all the time, but it's like a compulsion for me. And I get nervous that like I'm not going to figure the book out. And the only way I can figure it out is by working on it. So
Yep.
I work on it a lot.
And you, when you teach, tell your students to do it every day, even if it's just 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's so my tip for young writers or beginning writers is who, because the thing is, you have to look at what chapter of your life you're in. Like if you have, as Courtney has had like two kids under two, or you have aged parents that you're caring for, or you have a big job in the real world that requires a lot of you, you have to be realistic about what you can actually do and not beat yourself up for not writing 10,000 words when you've got like all this other legitimate obligations going on. But what you can do is write for 5 minutes a day and commit to writing for 5 minutes a day. And once you've written for 5 minutes, you put an X on your calendar, and your only job is to string together as many X's as possible. And obviously a lot of those days you will write for more than 5 minutes, but that will also keeps the work like alive under your fingertips. If you don't work on something for like 3 weeks, I find that it takes like a week to get back into it, whereas if you just do a little bit, then it's still alive for you and you can get right back in when you have more time.
Mhm, mhm. Um, let's see, what else do I want to ask you? So someone's asking, is this novel as character driven as Hello Beautiful? In Hello Beautiful, your characters were so well drawn. I felt as if I knew them so well. I could have sat down for a TV dinner and joined right in their conversation. I would
Oh,
say it is. It is very much as character driven, and you feel that same degree of like warm closeness to these people because you write such
oh,
three-dimensional humans. It's wonderful.
oh. Well, this it also like Hello Beautiful too. It's each chapter is in the point of view of a different family member. So like you really do go into them in the book. I mean, I think all my writing is character driven. Although I guess in Dear Edward there's a plane crash that gives it some kind of a plot.
Hmm. What was the? I'm trying to think who it is. I think it was Mike White. Did you watch White Lotus, that TV show?
No, I'm like the only person who hasn't seen it. I for some reason am scared to watch it.
You are the only person who hasn't seen it. It is so good. You should watch it.
Okay, I
He
should, yeah.
is like such a master of character.
Mm,
His show Enlightened. Have you watched that with Laura Dern? You would love
mm,
it. Okay, forget about White Lotus. Just watch Enlightened. You will love it.
okay.
TV show of all time. But
Oh,
I read something with him where he was saying, I've always been doing these basically the same kind of thing. But with White Lotus, I just put a murder at the beginning, and all of a sudden,
oh.
everyone wants, everyone wants in. But it's kind of the same material I've always been interested in and working with.
Oh, oh, I love that.
Plane crash. It's like,
Yes.
big
Well,
event, but it's
yes.
really about that.
Well, and that was the first book of mine that was successful. So, I mean, I guess that was the that was the kicker. There was and actually the funny, I mean, every writer gets 1-star reviews on Amazon or Goodreads. No matter what, if you publish like I don't know War and Peace, you're going to get a one. I mean, they'd be like it's too long, but my 1-star reviews for my books is always the same. Basically, I mean, barring some crazy people, and it's always that nothing happens in my books. And people do that for Dear Edward, and it just made me giggle because I'm like, "There's a plane crash," but I'd like, but you're right. I understand what you're saying. It's because like what I care about is like the interior emotional life. Like that's my jam. So like the tiny nuances of changes in a relationship and in the people over time and under challenge, and it's so tiny. And I can't think of the right word for the tiny threads that, of course, even though there's a plane crash, nothing happens.
Yeah. Someone is asking, did you revise within arm's reach? I cannot read what I've written without making some changes. Thinking I can
Oh,
say that better or that's awkward. Let me fix that. Oh my gosh, I feel that. I have that problem. Did you make any changes? Of course you did. If someone had the early copy, would they be able to compare?
well, I made a
Probably
basic
now, but you didn't revise. I think she means, did you revise,
oh, now.
which you did not?
Yes. No, I mean actually um there were like 6 places where I used like the same word 4 times in a page that I just couldn't abide by. So there were like I probably changed like 5 literal words just because I was horrified by the repetition. But no, that I made a commitment not to change anything because that's not in keeping with it being my first novel. So if you looked at the earlier version, it's the same book.
Hmm. How do you feel though about this sort of? I think it's a really interesting question because I think we all go about generating things differently. So, like Jamie Attenberg has that wonderful uh, community of writers doing 1,000 words a day, and I've tried to do that, and I find it mathematically kind of too confusing and impossible because I'm always, always, always going back and fixing and
Yeah.
changing and cutting. So then I'm like, well, I cut 300 words, so do I have to write 1,300 words today? I don't understand. I can't quite do it, but I think that that feeling of do I just generate from scratch or do I go back into what I've already done? How do you balance that?
In my ideal, I agree with the like word count things. I could never really do it because I revised so much that I could never make sense. I guess there's a way Hannah was saying that like I think you can do it so that it somehow keeps track of what you delete as well as whatever. So like at the end of the day, you still get a number that's actually real based on what you've
Oh.
actually taken away and added. Yeah. Um, somehow that's possible. What I like to do is to be working on a completely new chapter So like the blank page, which is kind of always harrowing. Like it's just like you're just writing what feels like garbage, trying to find what you think is going to happen in that chapter. And it's so ugly initially that it hurts my eyes. But
Mhm.
and then during the day, I'll alternate between revising the chapter before it and working on the new chapter. So I kind of like, and revising I love. Like that's just heaven, like where you're just making something better. Like in all the ways, like language and like making a scene a little deeper and all that kind of stuff. So that way I go back and forth so that I can bear sort of writing the new stuff because I know I get to um, rewrite as well.
Mhm.
What do you do?
What do I do? I there's I remember I think about this all the time. There's a great Nora Ephron essay where she writes about how the beginning of everything she writes is so much better than the end because she's always starts at the beginning. She always every day goes back to the beginning of what she
Oh,
works and reworks and reworks and has to get herself to the present place and keep
oh,
forward. And that's how I am too. So she kind of says,
mm.
I hope people judge me on the beginnings of what I've written and not the endings because it definitely is a precipitous drop because the endings are much. That's what Nora Ephron said. And I'm probably,
That's
you know,
really funny. Well,
uh,
that's actually like good writer advice because if your beginning is tight, you know, like if you're sending something to a literary magazine or the New Yorker or whatever, like you don't want to lose people in the beginning. If you can get them in, that's like that's what you want.
yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, as a reader, even there's so many novels. I think the beginning of the novel is so incredible that even if it kind of like starts flailing at a point, I still consider it a novel that I love because I
Yeah,
would, by the time I
yeah,
got to that point.
yeah.
Yeah, but I find it really hard to just start. I mean, for me, and maybe this is true for you too, all of my novels, I think, yeah, all of my novels have multiple points of view. And most have four, one has two. And
Oh,
right, Friends and Strangers, I think, has two.
yeah,
Um, but I find it really helpful to be like, okay, I need to start, I need to generate something. So I'm going to start a new character today. Or I'm
yeah.
going to leave the head of this person and go into this person. And it feels much more like I feel like if I were just with one character, that would be very difficult for me.
Yeah, I've never done that either. I can't like a whole book from one person. I can't imagine. It would be a good challenge, I guess, but like painful.
I feel like I would get so sick of that one person.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I'm amazed when people can do that, um, and go all the way to the end of the book with the same person.
Yeah. So if someone's asking about your inspiration, how do you get inspiration for your books? Where does it come from? Does it come from people you know? Does it come from where does it come from?
Well, I mean, okay, so this is where I give my obsession lecture. So I each book that I've written has had an obsession that has led me into it, and I used to fight those obsessions because I didn't really understand what they were, and now I embrace it. So actually, for Within Arm's Reach, there is a story in the first chapter of Within Arm's Reach um, about something that happens in this family, and that actually happened in my family, and that I was obsessed with that story from when I heard it told by an aunt or uncle, um, and I just had to write it down. And so, what I tell my students is that to imagine that all of us, not just writers, everybody has a individually, specifically calibrated magnet board inside them. Like picture you have a magnet board that fills up your torso, and what pulls to your magnet board is different than what pulls to your best friend or your partner or your twin sister. And if you are an artist or a writer, you need to listen to what thwacks against your board, because often what pulls against it has something to do with your work. It won't make sense to you much of the time, but it's there because there's something in it that has to go into your themes of what you're going to explore. And you have to listen because there's so much noise in our world, and we're so often told like what show we should watch, what book we should read, what the big thing is. Like you have to like make yourself as weird and quirky and specifically yourself as possible because your work requires it. So like if you're like feel compelled to watch a 9-part documentary about mushrooms and your husband is like that is so weird and there's part of you that'd be like, oh, that is weird. I probably shouldn't do that. But as a writer, you have to do it. Like there's something about the mushrooms that you have to explore. So like for Hello Beautiful, I became obsessed with the history of basketball, which is really entirely random because I live in a family of soccer players and I played soccer when I was growing up. But I have read like every good nonfiction book about the history of basketball that there is, and I loved every second of it. And so, like, when something like that lights me up, where I'm like, ah, give me another book about basketball, I know that it's going to lead into my work. And I had this idea for this little boy dribbling a basketball to start the book. And that ended up being the first image that came into my mind.
I love that. And what obsessions are you writing about now? If you want to say, you may not want to say, just fine.
Trees. So I'm working on a book now, and my obsession is trees. And it's really because I read The Overstory by Richard Powers like 2 years ago. Did you read that? Oh, you should.
No,
It's
I did buy it, but I haven't read it.
oh yeah, it's brilliant. And it for those of you that don't know, it's a novel, but it's about trees and the history of trees in this country and the advocacy for trees and the biology of trees. Richard Powers is like a genius person, and it's brilliant. And when I finish any book that I really love, I always like seek out every interview I can find with the writer of the book talking about the book so I can like learn more so I can stay in that orbit for a little longer. And in like three of the interviews that I listened to Richard Powers, he said the same thing, which was that he feels like it's the responsibility of contemporary writers and artists to diversify their storytelling, and not only diversify their storytelling in telling the stories of different peoples, which is of course incredibly important, but to diversify their storytelling to tell the stories of the world that we live in and the earth that we live on, and that is necessary to help raise the consciousness of humans in a way that it needs to be raised in order for us to continue to be humans on this planet. And I just felt like I was like, oh God, I need to try to do that. He's right. And so the book I'm writing now is set on the cul-de-sac I grew up on in New Jersey. And it's about the people who live on that cul-de-sac and the trees.
I love that. And then the next step is going to be you becoming a park ranger. So it's all going to come
I
full.
know it will come together. My father would be so dismayed.
Uh, I think in closing, because we have to stop talking now, you and I could continue talking for 6 more hours, but I don't know if anyone else would want to stay for that. Um, uh, I think it's very cool. Tell us about the cover, the new cover of Within Arm's Reach, because I love that
Oh
story.
yeah, I have it here. It is very beautiful. And so it's painted by the same artist who painted the Hello Beautiful cover, Jessica Miller, who's a spectacular artist. You should follow her. And it is actually a painting of my childhood home um, in Ramsey, New Jersey, which is the town that this book is set in. And it's also the town that my new book that I'm writing is set in. Um, and this was on the cul-de-sac that I'm writing about. Um,
I love that.
so it's very meaningful to me. I loved this house, and it's so special to have a painting of it. I think
Yeah.
it's so beautiful.
Do you think the people who live in that house now know that their house is on the cover of a novel?
No, well, you know what? They've turned it into like a McMansion. It's been like expanded on and everything. So like this is what it looked like when I lived there. So she did it from pictures, and it's still red, but it's got like, many extensions. And so I don't think they'd recognize it.
Oh my
I mean, I
gosh.
guess if they listen to this, they'll know, but the odds are small.
Wow. Well, Anne, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Courtney. I love talking to you. I really appreciate you doing this.
It was a pleasure. I can't believe my children didn't bust in.
Me
Um,
neither.
you're watching Bluey in the next room, so miracles can happen. Everyone read Within Arm's Reach. It is such a beautiful, incredible novel. You're going to love it if you haven't read it yet.
And thank you, everybody, for being with us tonight. We appreciate it. And pre order the Cliffs. You won't regret it. All right.
Bye.
Good night.